Imagine this scenario for a second. Let's say you're running a massive global division of, I don't know, like 5,000 people on a Monday.
Right.
Your phone is just ringing every 4 minutes. Your inbox is this absolute torrential downpour of strategic decisions, and your calendar is, well, basically a color-coded nightmare of back-to-back board meetings.
The standard C-suite reality.
Exactly. You're the operational center of gravity for a massive corporate machine. And then a door closes. A conversation happens. And by Tuesday morning, you wake up, you open your laptop, and your calendar is just a completely blank white screen.
Just nothing.
Yeah, no emails, no calls, just total silence.
And for a C-suite executive, you have to understand that silence isn't freedom. It's a psychological freefall.
Wow, yeah.
Because it is the immediate visceral realization that your perceived social and professional value has effectively evaporated overnight.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today, we are speaking directly to you, the listener, as we pull back the curtain on one of the most guarded, sophisticated, and frankly fascinating secrets in the corporate world.
It really is.
We are unpacking the exact architecture of what happens when high-level executives are shown the door. Because it turns out, catching these individuals before they hit the ground is not, just a matter of updating a resume and clicking apply on a job board.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's this highly engineered 90-day psychological and operational masterclass.
Yeah, it is a complete recalibration of the professional self. And what's fascinating here is the operational philosophy behind it. It operates on what we call a done-with-you model.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate, because that model is kind of the engine driving this entire 90-day process, right?
There's a core of it, yes.
Because usually when someone faces a massive career transition or, need to learn a new survival skill, the market offers two extreme options.
Right, you get the polar opposite.
Yeah. On one end, you have the do-it-yourself model. You buy a book, you sign up for some passive online course where you are just completely alone. And the failure rate there is catastrophic because there is zero accountability and zero feedback loop.
Precisely. You're just shouting into the void. And then on the absolute other extreme, you have the traditional one-on-one consulting model.
Which takes up all your time and money.
Exactly. This is where you pay an exorbitant fee to basically outsource the problem. You essentially hand your career over to a firm and say, fix this for me. Find me a job.
Right.
But that requires surrendering all your agency. And frankly, it doesn't prepare you for the reality of the market at all. So the done-with-you model, it sits directly in the center.
It's a hybrid.
Yes, exactly. It's a hybrid between a lonely online training and that full-time one-on-one consulting that drains all your resources. It provides the elite framework, the clinical psychological tools, and the expert sparring partners, but the executive still has to carry the weight of the introspection and the networking.
It's like, it's the difference between hiring someone to run a marathon for you versus hiring an elite Olympic coach to train you to run it yourself.
That's a perfect analogy.
You still have to sweat, but every drop of sweat is strategically calibrated. So our mission today is to distill this elite, done-with-you corporate playbook.
We're going to get into the mechanics of it.
Yeah, we're going to break down how to manage that psychological void we talked about, how to translate internal skills into actual external market value, and how to conquer the hidden job market.
And the beauty of this framework is that whether you are a sitting CEO, a mid-level manager, or an independent contributor, these mechanics dictate how the modern career actually functions.
Totally.
To truly grasp the sophistication of this modern framework, though, we kind of have to look at the evolutionary timeline first.
Right. Where did this all come from?
Exactly. We have to understand how the system for catching ousted executives has evolved over the decades, because honestly, it wasn't always this clinical.
All right, let's wind the clock back a bit. The origin story of what is broadly called outplacement, it actually starts in the United States back in the 1960s and 70s, right?
Yes, during an era of massive, brutal corporate restructuring.
Yeah, industrial giants were shifting gears. But the approach back then was entirely transactional.
It was purely administrative. If you lost your job as an executive in 1975, the company might pay a firm to provide you with a physical office space downtown, a dedicated phone line, and perhaps a secretary to type up your letters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they basically just point you toward the classified sections of the major newspapers. It was a physical placement service.
So no deep therapy sessions then?
None at all. There was no psychological component, no strategic narrative. It was literally just, here's a desk, go find a job.
A very literal nuts and bolts Band-Aid. But then, this concept crossed the Atlantic. It arrived in France in the late 1970s and 80s, and the European market mutated it into something completely different.
Radically different, yes.
It wasn't just a desk anymore.
Mm.
It became this highly exclusive VIP service reserved strictly for the absolute top-tier management and expats returning from overseas. It carried this huge aura of prestige.
Yes, the French market inherently understood that at the highest levels, the transition required more than administrative support. It required discretion and strategic positioning.
Right.
And as we moved through the 1990s and 2000s, the practice began to democratize. It became a standard inclusion in large-scale redundancy plans.
Well, they call PSEs in France, right?
Exactly, the Plan de Sauvegarde de l'Emploi. And this was offered down to the middle management level.
But the real paradigm shift, the leap into what we are calling modern executive engineering, that happened a lot more recently.
Yes, in the last 15 years or so. Post-2010.
Right, because the market became incredibly volatile, the average tenure of a CEO dropped dramatically, and the transition process just completely morphed.
It stopped being about finding a job and started being about global coaching, aggressive media training, and deep narrative storytelling.
And that shift toward narrative storytelling, that brings us to the most critical realization an executive must make on day one. We have to address the why. Like, why are these individuals leaving in the first place?
Which is such an important distinction to make.
It is. This is where we need to dismantle a massive misconception. When the general public hears that a CEO or a senior VP was fired, the immediate assumption is incompetence.
Of course. They assume someone messed up.
Right. The assumption is that they failed, they missed their targets, they just didn't know how to do the job.
Which, at that level of the corporate stratosphere, is almost never the reality.
Really.
Yeah. If you have navigated the political and operational gauntlet to reach the C-suite, your technical competence is a given. You know how to read a P&L. You know how to structure a global supply chain.
You don't just forget how to do your job.
Exactly. When a high-level executive is ousted, especially in today's climate of aggressive mergers, acquisitions, and activist investors, it is almost exclusively the result of a strategic divergence.
Okay, let's define that, because that term is the linchpin of the entire psychological recovery process. I look at it like a legendary rock band breaking up after 20 years of playing stadiums.
I love that analogy.
Right. When the band dissolves, it's never because the lead guitarist suddenly forgot how to play his instrument. His technical skills are perfectly intact. The breakup happens because there are irreconcilable creative differences about the future direction of the enterprise.
Yes, exactly.
The lead singer wants to pivot to, I don't know, experimental synth pop to chase a new demographic, and the guitarist wants to return to their heavy metal roots. Neither is objectively wrong, but they cannot coexist on the same stage anymore.
That is exactly the dynamic at play. A strategic divergence is a fundamental disagreement on governance, risk appetite, or market direction.
Right.
The board of directors might want to strip the company down and prepare for a private equity sale, while the sitting executive committee believes the strategy should be long-term R&D investment.
Two completely different vectors.
Exactly. And when those visions clash, the board exercises its power and the executive is removed.
So the company is going left, and your specific expertise is built for going right. Viewing a corporate firing through that lens completely neutralizes the stigma. I mean, it removes the word failure from the vocabulary entirely.
And it is absolutely mandatory that the executive internalizes this immediately.
Why immediately?
Because when someone is dismissed, the default human response is shame. It is a shattered sense of professional identity. If an executive internalizes that termination as a personal failure of competence, they will carry that defensive posture into the market.
And headhunters can probably smell that from a mile away.
Oh, instantly. A defensive posture is entirely toxic to a headhunter. Framing the exit strictly as a strategic divergence and objective misalignment of future vectors allows them to rebuild their professional self-image on a foundation of reality rather than a foundation of perceived inadequacy.
Okay, so the band has broken up. The executive understands it was just a divergence of strategy. The intellectual framing is in place. But now we have to deal with the physical reality.
The empty calendar.
Yes. We are back to that Tuesday morning. The calendar is empty. We are entering the 90-day paradigm and the battle against what the framework calls the void. First, explain the mechanics of this timeline. Why exactly 90 days?
It's a very specific choice.
Right, like why not a 30-day intensive boot camp or, I don't know, a luxurious 6-month exploration phase?
Well, the 90-day window is a highly calibrated psychological pressure cooker, and it's
Phase.
Well, the 90-day window is a highly calibrated psychological pressure cooker, and it's rooted deeply in the management science concept of the 12-week year.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah, the fundamental flaw with annual planning or open-ended timelines is Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion.
So true.
If you give a highly capable executive a full year to transition, human nature dictates they will not feel any genuine behavioral-altering urgency until month 10.
All right, they'll spend 3 weeks reorganizing their home office.
Yeah.
Another month casually reading industry magazines and, tell themselves they're researching.
Exactly, they diffuse their energy. But a 90-day window artificially compresses time. It forces the immediate breakdown of massive, intimidating goals, like mapping the entire hidden job market into daily microscopic actions.
It creates a sort of forced momentum.
It maintains a state of creative tension. 90 days is long enough to execute a profound strategic repositioning, but short enough that every single Tuesday matters.
Really can't waste a single week.
No, you cannot. It creates absolute urgency without tipping over into the panic that causes burnout.
But the immediate hurdle in those first few weeks is brutal. We mentioned the void earlier. I mean, these are people whose central nervous systems are wired to operate on a 14-hour-a-day adrenaline drip of crisis management and decision-making.
Yes, the cognitive overload is their normal baseline.
Right, so taking that away overnight has to induce actual withdrawal symptoms.
It is a profound neurological and psychological shock. Their dopamine loops are tied entirely to being the person with the answers.
Oh, wow, yeah, the dopamine hit of solving a crisis.
Exactly. So the empty calendar triggers a severe crisis of utility. That is why the done with you model intervenes on day one with a ruthless imposition of structure. The program artificially replaces the corporate scaffolding they just lost.
So they divide the calendar into highly specific blocks, right? We're talking strategic blocks and buffer blocks.
Yes. A strategic block is a 2 to 3 hour window of uninterrupted deep cognitive work.
Like deep work.
Exactly. This is when the executive is auditing their career history, writing their narrative, or analyzing market data. Zero distractions.
And the buffer blocks.
And the buffer blocks are positioned around these. These are for the administrative tasks, returning emails, scheduling coffees. By hyperstructuring the day, you eliminate the paralysis of infinite choice.
You don't have to think about what to do next.
Right. You wake up and you know exactly what your operational objective is for the next 4 hours.
Okay, but wait. I have to challenge the fundamental premise here.
Go for it.
We are taking someone who just fell off a 10-year corporate hamster wheel, who is likely completely exhausted, and we are immediately slamming them into a highly regimented elite athlete-style training matrix.
It sounds intense, I know.
It sounds crazy. We're talking mandatory strategic blocks, instituting the 3-3-3 breathing method to regulate their autonomic nervous system, and strictly policing their screen time so they don't doom scroll LinkedIn and trigger negative social comparisons.
Right.
Isn't this just replacing one hamster wheel with another? Why shouldn't the very first step of this framework be, go sit on a beach in Mallorca for a month, shut off your brain, and we will start the 90-day clock when you get back?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a very common instinct to want to prescribe a beach vacation. But when you look at the mechanics of momentum, the danger of the total shutdown approach becomes glaringly obvious.
How so?
Because a transition of this magnitude is not a vacation. It is the most complex project the executive will manage all year.
But don't they need to rest?
Yeah.
I mean, they're human.
There is a difference between active recovery and momentum loss. Think of the executive like a high-performance engine. If you are running at 8,000 RPMs for a decade and you suddenly cut the engine completely cold, restarting it a month later requires a massive, painful expenditure of energy.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like stalling out.
Exactly. The rigorous structure, the mental health routines, the breathing exercises, these aren't about working harder. They are about preventing the leakage of cognitive energy.
The leakage of energy, meaning the rumination, the anxiety, the staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering if you're irrelevant.
Precisely. Unstructured time breeds anxiety, and anxiety is cognitively exhausting. By maintaining a highly structured sparring partner dynamic with their transition coach, the executive stays engaged.
They keep the engine idling smoothly.
They do. They maintain the posture, the vocabulary, and the mental acuity of a leader. If you sit on a beach for a month, you don't just lose time, you lose your professional edge. You slip out of the mindset of a strategic operator and into the mindset of a retiree.
And climbing back out of that psychological hammock is incredibly difficult.
It really is.
That reframes it completely. You aren't resting. You're actively recalibrating the engine while keeping it warm. Okay, so the engine is idling, the schedule is locked. We officially enter phase 1, days 1 to 30, the identity audit.
Yes, the deep dive into the past.
And what's fascinating is that with all this urgency, the framework strictly forbids sending out a single resume or calling a single headhunter during this first month. Instead, it demands a forensic excavation of the past.
This is where the depth of the process separates itself from standard career advice. The objective of phase 1 is to map the professional patrimony.
The patrimony.
Right, but it is not an inventory of software proficiencies or job titles. It is an extraction of underlying transferable mechanisms.
Right. We need to distinguish between industry knowledge and core competency.
Yeah.
Let's say you've been a VP of supply chain in the aerospace sector for 15 years.
Okay, good example.
You know exactly how long it takes to machine a titanium turbine blade. But that knowledge is utterly useless if you want to transition to the pharmaceutical sector.
Exactly. The executive often conflates the context of their success with the engine of their success. The identity audit strips away the aerospace context.
So it looks at how they actually operate.
Yes.
Yeah.
It asks, how did you negotiate with heavily unionized suppliers? How did you manage cash flow during a massive global disruption? How did you align a divided executive board to approve a capital expenditure?
Oh, I see. Those are the transferable skills.
Crisis management, systemic organizational vision, complex stakeholder alignment. Those mechanisms work exactly the same way whether you are building airplanes or manufacturing vaccines.
To isolate those mechanisms, the framework deploys some serious psychometric machinery. We're talking MBTI and CCTI to map out how the executive processes information and makes decisions under stress.
Which is vital data.
But the one that really caught my attention is the strong inventory. Let's drill into the mechanics of that, because it sounds like a game changer.
The strong inventory is highly revealing because it doesn't just ask what you are good at. It maps your deepest underlying occupational interests and cross-references them with specific market environments.
Walk me through a hypothetical scenario. How does that actually play out in real time?
Let's take your VP of supply chain. For 15 years, they have been rewarded for extreme operational efficiency, cost-cutting, logistics, micromanaging timelines.
The classic ops guy.
Right. They assume that is their identity. But they take the strong inventory, and the data reveals that their core psychological drivers are actually artistic expression and high-level abstract strategy, while their interest in conventional operations is practically zero.
Wait, how did they survive for 15 years doing something they internally hate?
Because high performers are incredibly adaptable. They can muscle through misaligned environments through sheer willpower and competence, but it eventually leads to massive burnout. The strong inventory acts as a mirror, revealing the friction.
So it tells them what they actually want to do.
It tells the executive, you have the skills to run operations, but your psychological profile dictates you will only thrive in an environment focused on rapid innovation and unstructured problem solving.
That shifts their target entirely.
Yes. Gives them the data to say, I am never taking a traditional logistics role again. I am pivoting to lead a rapid prototyping division.
And while they are untangling that internal wiring, they are also undergoing 360-degree feedback. They literally go back to their former peers, their subordinates, and their past board members to extract data on how their leadership was actually perceived versus how they thought it was perceived.
Which requires a profoundly thick skin.
I can imagine. But there is an even deeper psychological layer happening in phase 1. The framework introduces a clinical concept called cognitive diffusion, pulled directly from ACT therapy, acceptance, and commitment therapy.
Yes, a very powerful tool.
How does a clinical psychological tool operate inside a corporate transition?
Cognitive diffusion is a mechanism to detach the executive's identity from their immediate emotional state. When an executive is ousted, the internal monologue is often a loop of betrayal or inadequacy.
Like the board betrayed me.
Or, I am a failure because I couldn't save that division. If they identify completely with those thoughts, it dictates their behavior.
So how does diffusion break the loop?
It alters the relationship with the thought. Instead of saying, I am a failure, the executive is trained to observe the thought mechanically. I am currently experiencing the thought that I am a failure.
Wow. Just adding that little phrase changes the whole impact.
It creates a vital psychological distance. It allows them to process the very real anger or exhaustion of the dismissal without letting it fuse to their new identity.
Why is this clinical detachment so crucial before they start marketing themselves? Can't they just fake a smile and power through the interviews?
You cannot fake it at the C-suite level. Absolutely not. If an executive walks into a high-stakes interview with a prominent headhunter and they are secretly carrying an unresolved burden of bitterness or a need to prove their previous employer wrong, it leaks.
How does it lead?
It leaks in the microexpressions. It leaks in how aggressively they answer a simple question about their previous CEO. It manifests as a rigid defensive posture.
And headhunters pick up on that.
Headhunters are expert profilers. If they detect even a hint of lingering resentment or emotional volatility, it is instantly disqualifying.
I guess that makes sense.
A board will not hand over the reins of a $100 million division to someone who is still fighting the ghosts of their last job. The psychological stabilization of phase 1 isn't touchy-feely wellness. It is absolute risk mitigation.
That is a brilliant articulation. You have to exorcise the ghost before you can build the new house.
Exactly.
So phase 1 is complete, the psychological baseline is flat, the core competencies are isolated. This brings us to phase 2, days 31 to 60, marketing the self.
Now the executive has to package this raw data into a compelling commercial product.
And the very first step of packaging is defining the target. Or, more accurately, defining the anti-target.
Defining what you will absolutely refuse to accept is the ultimate defense mechanism against wasted energy.
This is such a critical concept because when you are in a transition, especially if you've been out for a month, you're vulnerable to flattery.
Oh, heavily vulnerable.
A recruiter calls and says, "We have a fantastic role for you, but it requires 60% international travel, and you'll be reporting to a committee rather than a single CEO. If you haven't defined your boundaries, your ego says, 'They want me. Let's take the meeting.'
Right.
And suddenly you've burned 3 weeks interviewing for a job you will ultimately hate."
Precisely. The framework demands hard parameters. I will not accept a commute over 45 minutes. I will not work in the fossil fuel sector. I will not accept a role without a seat on the executive committee.
Establishing these non-negotiables protects your focus.
It allows you to rapidly filter the noise and dedicate your cognitive resources only to high probability, high alignment targets.
Once the target is locked, we have to define the ultimate value proposition. And the framework shifts the entire paradigm away from the resume. The executive is no longer allowed to answer the question, "What is your job title?"
They must answer a fundamentally different, much more aggressive question.
Right. What strategic problem am I uniquely capable of making disappear?
That is the shift from an internal feature to an external benefit.
Explain that difference.
Well, a board doesn't hire a chief financial officer because they want a CFO. They hire a CFO because their margin is eroding by 2% every quarter, and their current debt structure is suffocating their ability to acquire a competitor.
So the title is just a wrapper for the solution.
Exactly. The executive's value proposition must directly address the hemorrhage.
To deliver that value proposition, the program brings in actual media trainers, the kind of specialists who prepare politicians for national debates.
It's intense preparation.
They spend days physically drilling the executive on the 2-minute pitch. It's an exercise in extreme narrative compression.
Yes. They have 120 seconds to explain their history, articulate the strategic divergence that led to their exit without a hint of bitterness, and vividly present the specific problem they solve.
It is about mastering the posture of an equal. They are not asking for a job. They are offering a highly lucrative solution to a peer.
That posture is everything. And once that verbal pitch is flawless, it must be translated into the digital architecture. This is where we have to talk about the mechanics of LinkedIn.
Let's dive deep into this.
Yeah.
Because the vast majority of professionals, even at the highest levels, completely misunderstand what LinkedIn is.
They really do.
They treat it as a digital chronological filing cabinet for their CV. They list their title, the dates they worked there, 3 bullet points of their daily duties.
Which is a catastrophic waste of the platform's potential. Headhunters do not browse LinkedIn reading people's career histories for fun.
No one does.
Exactly. They use back-end enterprise-level search algorithms to hunt for highly specific microscopic combinations of skills and experiences.
So what does this all mean? The best way to visualize this is to stop thinking about your LinkedIn profile as a billboard and start thinking of it as a complex locking mechanism.
That's a great way to look at it.
A headhunter has a specific key they need to turn. Let's say they need a chief operating officer with M&A integration experience in the European SaaS market. That key has very specific teeth.
Right.
If your profile is just a generic list of operational duties, it's a blank tumbler. The key won't catch.
Yeah.
Your profile needs to be engineered with the exact specific keywords, the tumblers, so that when the headhunter's algorithm runs that highly complex query, your profile physically locks into place and triggers the match.
That is the exact mechanism. It is SEO, search engine optimization, applied to human capital. If you engineered a post-merger integration that saved 15 million euros, the words post-merger integration, M&A, and SaaS synergy must be indexed prominently in your summary and experience sections. You have to reverse engineer the exact search terms the headhunter will type into their console at 8:00 a.m. on a Monday.
So the narrative is tight, the digital lock is primed, and ready to catch the right key. We are now entering phase 3, days 61 to 90, conquering the hidden market.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
We have the polished product.
Yeah.
Where do we deploy it? And the framework's answer is a brutal reality check. You deploy it absolutely everywhere except traditional job boards.
The data on this is unequivocal. For C-suite and high-level executive roles, public job boards are a graveyard.
A graveyard.
They yield a success rate of roughly 7 to 20%, and that number is shrinking.
Why is that? I mean, why wouldn't a company just post a $300,000 VP role on LinkedIn Jobs?
Because of confidentiality and market signaling?
Ah,
If a publicly traded company publicly posts that they are looking for a new chief restructuring officer, what does that tell the stock market?
it signals panic.
It signals internal chaos. Furthermore, they do not want to sift through 4,000 resumes from unqualified applicants. The vast majority of these roles, upwards of 80%, are completely hidden.
So there are they.
They exist only in the confidential mandates given to retained executive search firms, the headhunters.
And this requires another massive perspective shift from the executive.
Yeah.
We need to explain the actual mechanical function of a headhunter, because the executive often thinks, I'll just send my shiny new profile to a top headhunter and they will act as my sports agent and go find me a team.
That is the most dangerous assumption an executive can make. A headhunter does not work for you.
They don't care about your career trajectory.
Not at all. They are retained by the board of directors and they are paid a massive fee, often 30% of the first year's total compensation, to mitigate risk.
Mitigate risk, that's the core of it.
Exactly. The board has a gaping hole in their ship and they are terrified of hiring the wrong captain. The headhunter's singular mandate is to find the absolute safest, most highly qualified, lowest risk puzzle piece to plug that hole.
Right.
Therefore, your interaction with a headhunter is not an interview. It is an interrogation of your risk profile. You must present yourself as the undeniable, frictionless solution to their highly specific mandate.
And if you aren't infiltrating the headhunter networks, you have to penetrate the other side of the hidden market. Direct networking. The framework notes that structured networking yield a massive 48% satisfaction rate for landing top-tier roles.
It is arguably the most effective channel.
But again, this isn't about walking into a generic cocktail mixer and handing out business cards while asking, are you hiring? It's about identifying what the framework calls network nodes.
The concept of the node is brilliant. A node is an individual who sits at the intersection of multiple information flows.
Right. It's not necessarily the CEO of the company you want to work for. A node might be a senior partner at a corporate law firm that handles M&A for your sector.
Or a partner at a private equity firm.
Exactly. They don't have a job to offer you directly, but they possess a transverse, eagle-eye view of the entire chessboard.
Yes. They know which CEO is quietly failing. They know which company is secretly planning a spinoff, and they know which board is getting restless.
They have the intelligence 3 months before the headhunter even gets the mandate.
And in the European market, particularly in France, where this framework is heavily utilized, identifying these nodes is highly institutionalized.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
There are incredibly powerful, structured ecosystems designed specifically for this level of peer-to-peer intelligence sharing.
Let's contrast a few of these because they operate on very different mechanics. Take the APM Association for the Progress of Management. It was founded in 1987. It has over 8,000 active leaders, but you cannot just buy a membership.
No, APM operates strictly on co-optation. It is a closed-door, high-trust environment. You must be sponsored by an existing member, and your business must meet specific size criteria. The mechanics there are based on peer advisory and continuous learning. It is a place where sitting CEOs go to discuss their most confidential operational nightmares with a trusted circle who have no financial stake in their company.
Then you have networks like CJD for leaders under 45 focusing on societal impact, or Germay, or even regional groups like Le Cercle de Lyon. But contrast APM with something like Avarap.
Avarap serves a completely different yet equally vital mechanical function. It is specifically designed for executives who are actively in transition.
So it's for people currently out of a job.
Yes. It utilizes a highly structured solidarity group methodology. You join a group of peers, and for several months you systematically deconstruct and reconstruct each other's professional projects.
It's a collective intelligence engine.
Exactly, designed to combat the isolation of the void we discussed earlier.
But this brings up a crucial strategic imperative. This raises an important question. How do we maintain these networks when we aren't looking for a job? This changes how you have to look at your own phone contacts right now, whether you are employed or not.
It really does.
If you wait until you are fired to try and infiltrate the APM or build relationships with these nodes, you are dead in the water.
It is the oldest, truest axiom in business. Do not wait until you are thirsty to dig the well.
You have to build the network in peacetime. You have to be the one offering intel, making introductions, and providing value when you need absolutely nothing in return.
That builds the reservoir of social capital that you will inevitably need to draw upon when your strategic divergence happens.
And if you have managed the void, audited your identity, crafted your pitch, and successfully activated these nodes, the hidden market will eventually yield a result. An offer will materialize.
The system works if you work the system.
Which brings us to segment 6, the payoff. The negotiation and the management package. And I want to be clear here, at the C-suite level, we are not going to spend time talking about the base salary.
No, the fixed salary is just the baseline.
Right, it's just the price of admission. The real wealth generation and the real power dynamics are entirely dictated by the architecture of the broader compensation package.
The fixed salary pays the mortgage. The long-term incentives, the LTI, are what generate generational wealth.
And what's the real purpose of the LTI?
Absolute alignment. The board wants to guarantee that the new executive loses sleep over the exact same metrics that the shareholders lose sleep over.
We see traditional tools like stock options or AGA-free shares granted over time. But here's where it gets really interesting. The mechanic that is truly fascinating, especially in the world of private equity and mid-cap companies, is the use of phantom shares.
Oh, yes. Phantom shares.
Let's drill into the hatch-OW of phantom equity, because it sounds like a financial magic trick.
Phantom shares are a brilliant piece of legal and financial engineering. Imagine a highly successful, privately held family business.
Correct.
The founders need to bring in a heavyweight external CEO to double the company's revenue. But the family absolutely refuses to dilute their actual ownership or give up any voting rights on the board.
So how do you incentivize a top-tier CEO without giving them real stock?
You create shadow equity. A phantom share is a contractual agreement that says, we will grant you 10,000 fictitious shares. Today, the company is valued at 50 million euros, making each phantom share worth a baseline amount.
Right.
Over the next 5 years, your job is to drive our EBITDA, our profitability through the roof. If in 5 years there is a liquidity event, meaning we sell the company or go public and the valuation has doubled to 100 million euros, these phantom shares will pay out a massive cash bonus that perfectly mirrors the growth curve of the real equity.
That's incredible. You get all the financial upside of explosive growth without ever touching the actual cap table of the company.
Exactly. But negotiating the upside is only half the battle. The executive must simultaneously negotiate the defensive architecture, the legal clauses.
This is where the parachute is meticulously packed before the plane ever takes off.
Precisely.
Let's talk about the specific levers pulled during this phase. Vesting, for instance.
Vesting simply means you do not acquire your equity all at once. It is a retention tool. Your phantom shares might vest over 4 years, 25% a year.
Right. Pretty standard.
But the executive negotiation comes in the form of acceleration clauses. What happens if the company is sold in year 2? A sophisticated executive will negotiate a change of control acceleration, meaning if the company is sold, 100% of their unvested shares immediately vest and pay out.
They ensure they don't get left empty-handed if the board decides to cash out early. And then there are the bad lever clauses. These are the tripwires.
The bad lever clause defines the exact conditions under which you forfeit all of your unvested wealth.
Ouch.
If you are fired for gross misconduct, or if you simply resign to go to a competitor, you are a bad lever. You lose the equity.
So how do you negotiate that?
The negotiation here is deeply combative because the executive must aggressively limit the definition of cause. They cannot allow the board to define a simple disagreement over strategy as a bad lever event.
And we have to address the non-compete clauses, because this is where executives often make a fatal error. They sign a broad non-compete thinking it's standard boilerplate.
Found encumbrance.
Is a massive restriction of trade.
It is a profound encumbrance. If a company demands that you cannot work in your chosen industry for 24 months after leaving, they are essentially putting your career on ice.
Yeah.
Therefore, the executive must negotiate garden leave or substantial financial compensation. In many jurisdictions, if the company enforces the non-compete, they must physically pay you a significant percentage of your salary to sit in your garden and do nothing for 2 years.
And if they don't pay you?
If there is no mandatory financial compensation attached, the non-compete is often legally void.
And finally, there are profound tax optimizations to consider, particularly in cross-border transitions. The framework highlights impatriation.
Oh, this is huge.
Right. If an executive has been working in London or Singapore and is recruited back to a French headquarters, they can leverage specific tax codes.
The impatriation regime in France, for example, is a massive lever. If structured currently by specialized tax attorneys before the contract is signed, the executive can legally exempt up to 50% of their total remuneration from income tax for up to 8 years.
Wait, 50%?
Yes, alongside exemptions on wealth tax for foreign assets.
A 50% tax exemption on a 7-figure package. That single negotiation point radically alters the net wealth generated by the role.
It really does.
And this highlights the psychological reality of the negotiation phase. Negotiating these complex clauses, the phantom shares, the acceleration triggers, the impatriation, is not about greed. It is your first operational act as a leader.
It absolutely is. The board is testing you.
Testically.
Yes. If you roll over and accept a generic contract without fighting for a change of control acceleration or a structured severance, the board will unconsciously assume you will be equally weak when negotiating with a hostile supplier or a militant union.
I see.
The negotiation of your management package is the ultimate demonstration of your strategic lethality.
So you prove your lethality. The contract is executed, the parachute is packed, the champagne is poured, the 90-day transition is over, and you are officially the new CEO. We can all relax now, right?
That is the final and perhaps most dangerous illusion of the entire process. Getting the job is merely the preamble.
This brings us to segment 7, the next 90 days, executive onboarding. The framework reveals a terrifying statistic. The risk of failure for a newly placed executive within the first 18 months is extraordinarily high.
Alarmingly high.
And it is almost never because their grand business strategy was flawed.
It is almost exclusively due to tissue rejection.
Tissue rejection, meaning the organization's immune system identifies the new executive as a foreign body and actively attacks them.
Precisely. Imagine a highly aggressive, rapid iteration executive being parachuted into a legacy 100-year-old manufacturing firm that prides itself on consensus and tradition.
Oil and water.
Exactly. If that executive comes in on day one and starts firing vice presidents and mandating new agile software protocols without understanding the underlying cultural power structures,
What happens?
the middle management will simply quietly revolt. They will starve the executive of vital information. They will slow walk implementations. And within 18 months, the board will be forced to eject the new CEO to stop the bleeding.
To prevent that tissue rejection, the framework immediately restarts the clock. Another 90-day sprint, but this time it's an integration matrix. It's broken down into observe, align, and act.
Days 1 to 30. Observation and diagnosis. You keep your hands off the levers of power. You do not make sweeping changes.
Just watch.
You spend 30 days listening. You map the invisible internal politics. Who actually wields influence, regardless of their job title? What are the sacred cows of the corporate culture? What are the immediate bleeding operational emergencies that need a quiet tourniquet?
Then, days 31 to 60. Strategic alignment. You have your diagnosis. Now, before you launch your grand vision to the company, you take it to the board or the COMEX.
You pre-wire the decisions.
Right. You ensure that the key stakeholders are thoroughly aligned with your roadmap so that when you face inevitable resistance from the rank and file, the board has your back.
And finally, days 61 to 90. Action and mobilization. The culture is mapped, the board is aligned. Now you strike.
The quick wins.
Yes, you launch highly visible, carefully chosen initiatives designed to secure quick wins. These wins prove your competence to the organization, unify the teams under your new direction, and solidify your authority.
And what's brilliant is that during this critical first 90 days on the job, the outplacement coach from the first 90 days doesn't disappear. The done-with-you model continues. The transition coach morphs into an integration coach.
This continuity is vital. When the executive is inside the new machine, the fog of war descends. They lose perspective.
Yeah, you get caught up in the
Fog of war descends. They lose perspective.
daily fires.
The integration coach remains on the outside. They serve as an objective, high-level sounding board. When the executive is frustrated that the CFO is blocking their budget, the coach helps them step back, analyze the interpersonal dynamics, and decode the resistance without emotional bias.
And when you look at the macro data, the results of this entire continuous architecture are undeniable. A study by Syntec demonstrates that utilizing this deeply structured psychological and operational outplacement process reduces the time it takes an executive to return to high-level employment by 30% to 50%.
It is a staggering optimization of human capital. It saves months of lost income, it preserves the executive's psychological integrity, and it guarantees the hiring company receives a leader who is stabilized, hyper-focused, and operationally ready on day one.
It is a masterclass in strategic resilience. Let's synthesize this incredible journey.
It's been a lot to cover.
Really has. We started by dismantling the trauma of the exit, reframing the firing as a purely objective strategic divergence.
Yeah.
We explore the absolute necessity of managing the psychological void by artificially imposing the brutal 90-day structure of the 12-week year.
Crucial step.
We use psychometrics, like the strong inventory, to audit the true, transferable professional identity. We package that identity, translating internal skills into external value propositions, and built digital locks designed for specific headhunter keys on LinkedIn.
Which is where most people get it wrong.
We bypass the public job boards entirely to infiltrate the hidden market through strategic network nodes. We unpacked the aggressive financial engineering of phantom shares and vesting acceleration. And finally, we looked at the critical 90-day survival guide to prevent organizational tissue rejection.
The depth and rigor of this framework demonstrate a profound shift in how we must view professional longevity. Managing one's own career transition is absolutely no longer a luxury reserved for ousted C-suite executives who get handed a severance package.
It's a survival skill for the modern economy.
Precisely. We operate in a landscape where technological disruption and structural economic changes are the baseline reality. Entire divisions can be rendered obsolete by an algorithm in a matter of months.
Exactly.
Therefore, mastering the mechanics of transition, knowing how to isolate your transferable value, how to maintain a dormant network of strategic nodes, and how to negotiate your entry into a new ecosystem is a fundamental leadership competency for every professional at every level.
Which leaves us with the provocative final thought. If the ability to seamlessly manage a massive career transition is an essential everyday skill in today's volatile market, doesn't that fundamentally change who we work for?
That's a great question.
Are we all essentially the temporary CEOs of our own highly specialized one-person service corporations? And if we accept that we are always living in a state of pre-transition, just waiting for the next strategic divergence, what does your personal 90-day action plan look like starting tomorrow morning?
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.